Hello everyone, myself Sridhar and I am from CSCF section and the complex engineering problem. My topic is about verbal communication versus non-verbal communication. Verbal communication versus non-verbal communication. Here we can see this presentation explores the distinction and interplay between verbal and non-verbal communication. Here from the picture you can see that what is verbal communication and what is non-verbal communication. And here verbal communication, which means in verbal communication a person uses words or speeches to exchange information or messages. In non-verbal communication is a communication process in where a person doesn't use a single word to pass his or her messages. He just uses a body languages. But in verbal communication, the people use words or speeches in the form of communication. But in non-verbal communication, there is no such thing, and there is only a body language in non-verbal communication. Introduction to communication. Communication is a process of exchanging information. It can occur through various means, including verbal and non-verbal method. Here you can see what is communication. Communication is the process of exchanging information, ideas, thoughts, feelings, and messages between individual or groups through various channels and mediums. It involves both the transmission and reception of messages and can occur through verbal, non-verbal, written, or visual means. Defining verbal communication. Verbal communication involves the use of spoken or written words. It is characterized by language structure, including grammar and vocabulary. Here, communication involves a spoken and written words, which is verbal and non-verbal. Body language use of posture, gestures, and facial expression is non-verbal communication. Characteristics of verbal communication. Clarity is essential for effective verbal communication. Tone and pitch can convey emotions and intentions. Verbal communication. Verbal communication is the process of transmitting information to the other people using language. It includes the oral exchange of concepts, emotions, and knowledge. Here we have some examples and skills. Example can include having a phone call and speaking up in a meeting, giving a speech to a group of people, teaching an in-person class, ordering food at restaurant, asking for directions on the street, giving in-person feedback. The skills include effective verbal communication skills are projecting your voice, volume modulation, tone modulation, active listening, appropriate humor, and strategic pauses. Benefits of verbal communication. It allows for precise expression of thoughts and ideas. Verbal communication can facilitate immediate feedback and clarification. Defining nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication encompasses all forms of communication without words. It includes body language, facial expression, and gestures. Here, nonverbal communication is the transmission of message or signals through a nonverbal platform such as eye contact, facial expression, gestures, postures, and the distance between two individuals. Characteristics of nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is often subconscious and instinctive. It can be culture specific with different meaning across societies. Here we can see that verbal and non-verbal communications in different countries. Here we have aspect as countries and verbal communication, non-verbal communications. In USA, direct verbal communication is direct, explicit, and non-verbal communication is eye contact, important value, personal space. In Japan, indirect verbal communication is indirect, context driven, and non-verbal communication is subtle cues, bowling common. And in Middle East, the verbal communication is storytelling style and respect focused. And non-verbal communication in Middle East is close proximity, verdict, varied eye contact. And in India, the verbal communication is polite, harmony oriented, and non-verbal communication is tight, heritage for agreement and less personal space. In Germany, the verbal communication is precise, content focused, and non-verbal communication is firm, handshake, and less non-verbal emphasis. And in Brazil, the non-verbal communication is warm, expressive, and non-verbal communication is touch, common expression, and gestures. In China, the verbal communication is indirect and hierarchical, and non-verbal communication is significant and directional. Benefits of non-verbal communication. It can reinforce or contradict verbal messages. Non-verbal cues can enhance understanding and empathy. Here, the non-verbal communication can also uses for to enhance the understanding and empathy between the people. Difference in context. Verbal communication is often preferred in formal setting. Non-verbal communication is more prevalent in casual interaction. Types of communication. Here we have generally we categorize communication into four mediums of communication and verbal, non-verbal, written, and visual. Non-verbal communication. The non-verbal communication is referred to any form of communication that is not transmitted through spoken word. And verbal communication is a communication in the form of communication that occurs through spoken word. And visual communication is a means the transfer of information to a person in a format that can be read or viewed. Written communication involves the use of words, sentence, and paragraph in order to communicate. Cultural influences on communication. Verbal communication varies by language and dialect. Nonverbal communication can either significantly across cultures, and the culture influences the communication very well. As you have previously seen some slide, which is the countries having the different types of gestures in verbal and non-verbal communication. So the cultures influence on communication. Interplay between verbal and non-verbal communication. Both verbal and non-verbal communication work together to convey messages. Inconsistencies between the two can lead to misunderstanding. Here you can see the verbal communication and non-verbal communication both are working together to convey some messages, and in the interpretation or inconsistency between these two can lead to many misunderstandings. Active listening in verbal communication. Active listening is a crucial for effective verbal communication. It involves fully concentrating and responding to the speaker. Here we can see some active listening things which are establishing optimal condition and reading body language. Here we have some active listening. Those are giving feedback which is indicated by a thumb symbol, and some read emotional cues and summarizing and paraphrasing and questioning, avoid distraction, body gestures, facial expression, and eye contact. By active listening, you can all get all these things as a building relationships and understanding. We can give a good feedback and we can question as we have some doubts and get some emotional cues and give feedback and summarize our things and paraphrase, and uh, some establish some optical conditions and reading body language some such as eye contact. Maintaining eye contact is most important, and facial expressions are most important, body gestures, and avoid distractions. Interpreting nonverbal signals. Awareness of nonverbal signals can improve interpersonal communication. Body posture, eye contact, and gestures provide context to verbal communication. Nonverbal communication is a transmission of messages when the signals where some platforms are used, and interpreting the nonverbal signals as has a awareness of nonverbal signals can improve interpersonal communication. Body posture, eye contact, and gestures provide the context to the verbal messages. Barriers to effective verbal communication. Language difference can create barriers in verbal communication. Emotion states can affect the how messages are received and interpreted. Here, there are some different types of barriers. Barriers to effective communication are the physical barriers, personal barriers, organizational barriers, cultural barriers, schematic barriers, gender barriers, environment barriers, emotional barriers, language barriers, and more. Barriers to effective non-verbal communication. Misperceptions of non-verbal cues can lead to misunderstanding. Cultural differences can influence the interpretation of gestures. There are 15 barriers to non-verbal communication examples. Incoherent body language, lack of eye contact, cultural misinterpretation, inappropriate facial expression, proximity discomfort, contradictory vocal tone, limited gestures, cultural touch norms, gender specific normal non-verbal norms, environmental distractions, technology mediated communication, personal prejudice, emotional blocks, language barriers, and status differences. Enhancing verbal communication skills. Practice active listening to improve your verbal interactions. Be mindful of your tone and word choice in conversations. Enhancing nonverbal communication skills. Be conscious of your body language during conversations. Engage in self awareness to understand your nonverbal cues, which may enhance your nonverbal communication skills. The role of technology in communication. Technology influences how we engage in verbal communication. Non-verbal cues can be lost in digital communication. The role of communication, technology in communication is vital, which where the technology influences how we engage in verbal communication, but in non-verbal communication, we can lost in digital communication. Conclusion. Both verbal and nonverbal communication are essential for effective interactions. Understanding the differences can enhance communication skills. Here, some of the nonverbal communications are pitch of voice, posture, body language, eye contact, blinking, time, facial expression, personal presentation, smell, gestures, tone of voice, and etc. And these differences are taken from the reference where Alder R.V. Elmore, Elhorst, J.M. 2021, Communicating at Work, McGraw-Hill Education, Knapp, M.L. and Halls, S. 2010, Nonverbal Communication in Human Interaction, Cengage Learning. And this is all about the differences between the verbal communication and nonverbal communication. And thank you.